But yeah, since you were here joining us first, I don't know how to say your name, Raghunath. Just to give you some background, get more open in any way, shape, or form, whether it be CLI, whether it be the cloud offering, however you interact with OpenHands, the good, the bad. So since you're here, I'll go ahead and ask you, what's your experience with OpenHands so far, and how do you normally use OpenHands?
Hey, I haven't used OpenHands so far. I got your source code. I have explored your source code a little bit, but I haven't used it actively yet. And I'm just more curious because I also realized Ray Myers is involved with the project.
Cool. Well, thanks for that background, Raghunath. Where did you discover OpenHands, out of curiosity?
So it was Ray. I think it was called OpenLivin, and Ray used to talk about this a lot on social media. I just got curious, and like now I'm looking into a lot of different coding agents out of curiosity. So I look at their repositories and try to understand what's going on with these. So that's how I cloned OpenHands and then started looking into the source.
Oh, okay, cool. So you started kind of like really trying to dig into like how the project works and things like that. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. That's awesome. And it sounds like you haven't had a chance to install it yet.
No, I haven't had the chance to install it yet.
Oh, okay, cool. Is that just a matter of time, or I'd just be curious if there's any kind of feedback you had on our docs around the install?
I'm only looking at it statically. I've not tried to run it yet. However, I also came across a Refactor SDK post recently, maybe sometime this week, yesterday, maybe, I don't know. I'm a little bit more curious about it. Like, is it part of the open source project, or is it like a specialized cloud offering that you folks are exploring?
Yeah.
I also noticed there's a little bit of overlap on Cursor. Cursor released something today called Cursor 2.0 that also has like a diverge and converge sort of workflow. And the Refactor SDK, at least like on the surface, looks like a very similar approach.
Okay, interesting. So maybe there's a couple things there. So I think one is the Refactor SDK. I'm assuming you saw that on our blog post.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Yeah, so that's actually something that we are, it's very much like a beta product that is part of our commercial offering. So it's not available in our open source. We're actually targeting kind of big enterprise companies for that use case. Right. But we do, and so it is a little different, but we do, one of the other kind of SDKs that we recently came out with is what we call the Software Agent SDK. And this is open source. This allows you to build your own kind of, agents to solve repetitive tasks. And that SDK is, think of it as like the Lego bricks for how OpenHands is built and run. So we offer like a CLI and a web-based GUI. That's all built kind of on the SDK. So that's one other SDK that we just kind of recently announced.
Interesting. So OpenHands, the software agent also has the list of tools, which I can probably look into. Interesting. Oh, this is very similar to the software agent that you are shipping, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is essentially the OpenHands agent is the SDK, and we do provide actually I'm sending a link here in the chat. We do provide some examples of how you can build your own agent using like GitHub workflows. So like a popular example is doing like PR reviews. And so there's like an out of the box example of how to use the SDK to do a PR review as part of a GitHub workflow. But we think that there's many more use cases, right? Like folks may want to automate the publication of their changelog, or the writing up the changelog. They may want to automate unit tests. I'm exploring how to use it for writing PRDs. So there's a number of different kind of use cases for that.
So I recently came across Claude Code's sub-agents, right? The only thing is It's tied to Anthropic. So I don't think you can use a different language model provider with that, right? But from what you're showcasing to me, it's also very similar to sub agents because I can still access the tools from your software agent, but can use my own maybe local models or models from other providers, right? So which
Correct.
means, for example, if I want to do like a code review, I could still do like a language model as a judge and then delegate it to 2 or 3 different language models and then figure out like what is the best code review. Like say for example, the security code review, or is it like a architecture code review? I can delegate specific agents, but I'm still not tied to a certain provider, right? Is that my
Correct.
understanding?
Yeah. So I think you have a good understanding of that, and then I'll let our technical folks weigh in too. But at a very high level, like because OpenHands is an open source project and the SDK is also open source, we're model agnostic. That's actually, I think, one of our biggest advantages over some of the other SDKs that might be, aligned to a specific provider. And you could create an SDK that delegates a task to multiple different models for like a best of n type scenario or as a judge. So that is another way to use it. But yeah, I don't know if any of our technical team members have anything to add around that.
Little bit, but by the way, hey, Ryan, I believe you've got legacycode.com. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Excellent, excellent.
Awesome.
So I agree with what Joe is saying there, and basically previously we were always highly customizable sort of by virtue of being open source, but to actually take advantage of that, you would often have to just sort of rip the guts out of the existing package. So I kind of see the Software Agent SDK as a fulfillment of that customizability, in the sense that, like, okay, now the engine we are using to build these you can use independent of the package, and we're seeing increasingly like more ways people want to have a lot of control over how agents behave, and so yeah, anyway, I don't have a conclusion there, but what Joe said makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I can imagine certain use cases, especially customized workflow, which is a lot more flexible than what I get with other things like Claude Agent SDK, because then that's not part, like either you can use Claude sub agents or you go use the entire SDK and build your own tools, which I think there's no easy middle ground for someone to take advantage of existing, like other model providers along with existing software development tools. I think like that's where this is a very compelling offering. Yeah.
And what's a compelling offering? The SDK?
Yeah, the SDK is the
Yeah.
software SDK.
Yeah. I mean, and that's MIT license, so that's we're excited about that because we think that a lot of folks will be building their own agents. I think the Refactor SDK is a little bit different, more commercially oriented, built still around OpenHands and our core software agent SDK, but it's designed to kind of enable a higher level of scale. So like you may end up running multiple OpenHands agents to refactor code on a very, very large code base versus kind of using the software agent SDK on a single task, right? So it's a little bit of a different offering, but something we're still testing in beta with clients.
Interesting. One more question that I have is, I've tried to understand some of these coding agents, and every coding agent gets built with a certain philosophy in mind. Like say, for example, I believe there is one IDER, I don't know if it's IDER, they always want the code to stay green, right? So if you have any failing tests or if you have any build errors, that becomes part of the current conversation. So the developers expect you to fix everything before they go work on something else, right? So I believe like that's one of the differentiating factors between different companies that are still building different kinds of coding agents, right? Because the developers believe there is a right way to build and maintain existing software, right? So what kind of philosophy is OpenHands built on top of? Like, do you have like an opinionated way on how software development should happen, and does that get encoded into the tool? Like,
It's a good question. I would maybe defer that to Ray. Do we have a specific software development methodology in mind, and is that how the tool operates? I mean, I have sort of a maybe a way to answer that, but I want to get Ray's definitely probably closer to that philosophy, I think.
Yeah. So this is really part of the reason, maybe the primary reason I got into the AI coding space, is because I think that any dev tool operates within a space of like the sort of the physics of the task you're trying to do. Like kind of the knowledge of the trade needs to be intrinsic to the design. I can tell you what exists today is there's ways that we think about how performant an agent is that is probably more dominant in how this is crafted. So some of this, I'm going to get more concrete in a second here, but some of the things we know about how software engineering works, not just programming, but like software engineering scale, some of those are able to be captured in academically relevant benchmarks. So you may know about SWEBench. OpenHands runs on a whole lot of other benchmarks. The VersaBench paper was one that like covered a whole lot and talked about how introducing like multimodal browsing increased its abilities across a lot of different software engineering related tasks. So we are pretty good at saying that an agent is optimized for something that there can be a formal benchmark for. But in terms of fitting into people's workflow, right, in terms of taking that like very autonomous agent that can run well in a benchmark and saying, okay, well, now that we know it can be very autonomous and do a lot on its own, what's the right way for it to fit in? Like turning down the autonomy almost like kind of strategically. I think that's where we're still a little behind. Because I think we're very strong on what can be measured in benchmarks, which tends to be like how autonomous can the agent be, and okay, and then it relies a little too much on I think now user education and discipline to know like, okay, you've got this thing that'll just go off and okay, how do you rein it in? But this is where the Agent SDK allows you to decide in your process what's appropriate, and I'm excited that like with that you're not limited to prompting. For instance, there have been people that try to do like a test-driven development prompt, right? And then like, and this is true of pretty much every agent in the space, it'll like sort of sometimes follow your exact process and sometimes not, because a prompt is a suggestion. But when you code an agent, it's going to do what you code it to. So I guess, yeah, I can say there's, if that helps answer your question, there are elements that we can capture in benchmarks of is an agent doing this of its own accord. But in terms of fitting into the software engineering like life cycle, you know, we're less far in product design, and the way that needs to be expressed in every environment is so different that it's difficult to even think of how to do a one product design that would work for everyone without saying everyone move your process to meet this also. So I'd love for us to have a really solid vision on all that, but like I think we're honest that the scope is huge to really have the best answers there. It'll probably be like a decade in the making for the industry.
Another, like, from a higher level overview for the design philosophy that the agent team has used is, like, to complement what Ray's saying, is one, have a single general purpose agent over like many task specific agents. So that's a general design philosophy that they've adopted early on. Then the second philosophy that came from adopting that was taking the general purpose agent and finding ways to customize it to your specific needs. So that's kind of where we introduced the concept of micro agents. Now it's rebranded to be skills, but this is like additional ways of pulling in context such that the agent is more specifically suited to your workflows. And then taking that a little bit further to better improve customizability for use cases with like integrated with MCP. So that way you can pull in new tools without having to like rip out the code base and like code them in very concretely. And then going one step further from there, now we have that Software Agent SDK that Ray was talking about, which then again enables you to like further customize this highly general purpose agent and like wire in your own tools, etc., very easily. So I think that's the general design philosophy, and like the idea being like we want to be on the more autonomous agentic side of things. So like that's another way that the Software Agent SDK helps, which is now you can deploy them in your CIs, you can deploy them programmatically, etc., and you get this highly general purpose yet customizable thing that you can kind of try to use anywhere.
I had a question for you, Raghunath. So it sounds like you're a founder, right? But I'm curious, have you ever worked for like a larger corporation or in an enterprise type environment?
I have in the past, like most of my clients were these enterprise organizations, like some of them had up to 10,000 employees, but I've never been employed full-time ever since the start of my career.
Okay. I maybe from your experience then kind of working with enterprises, I just had like two random questions, if you don't mind. One of the things that we're trying to get feedback on, one is if you're just a developer in an enterprise, and you discover sort of a project like OpenHands, right? How free are you to download and install that?
So I have always been a consultant in these companies, so I do have access to the decision makers. Like usually I work with directors of engineering or CXOs or VPs. So I do have a lot of flexibility in pushing,
Influencing
the technological decisions because I'm brought in for that kind of purposes. But I've noticed that developers struggle even trying to get a license for Ruby. What do you call it? Like there's a JetBrains Ruby IDE. I don't know.
Yeah, to get like a commercial license to use it.
Sometimes it's very hard for them to even get buy-in for these things. In the organization that I've worked with, companies that's pre-series C, like A, B, C, they have a lot more flexibility over these kind of decisions.
Right.
But bigger companies are a little bit more tricky. You need someone influential who could vouch for you. But there are teams that can do it. I think like the developer experience team and the platform teams have a lot more influence than product development teams in general. That's my observation from working with these teams so far.
Gotcha. It makes sense. And if the product was like free, open source, free, you could download, like as a developer, you don't need to get a license to use it, for example. Does that help with eliminating some of the friction in your mind?
It does. It just has to go through their security team, like, depending on what kind of compliance that they fall under. Like some industries are more regulated than others. So if it's like a fairly less regulated industry, it's a lot more easier for developers to experiment. And especially if it doesn't cost much, companies are okay with open to experimenting with new tools.
Yeah. Okay. And then my final question would be like, so obviously security review is important, right? If you're just going to, let's say, evaluate the open source before you end up kind of bringing in security or kind of going more for a larger deployment, even if it's an open source project, do you find things like if the tool required the use of Docker, does that become a problem for developers to install and use on their desktop, or is that something that developers generally have available?
That really depends on the team themselves. Say, for example, backend teams have a lot more flexibility. For example, if you're working with mobile application teams, is primarily limited to the kind of machines that they're issued. Because if you're building Android or iOS applications and then you're given a 16 GB RAM, then memory becomes a problem for some of these developers. So mostly developers who are already maximizing utilization on their local devices may be hesitant to try out additional tools in general, not just Docker. Sometimes they even try to avoid applications built on Electron based platform. So that also is like memory hungry. But apart from that, if I don't see how it would be a problem for teams that are not really pushing the limits of their machines.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
And then
Thank you for that.
there's also like a skill thing. So if developers are more open to learning Docker, it's easier for them to work with it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you have any more questions?
No, I think that's it. I mean, we're going to be doing like a developer survey pretty soon, so I'm trying to figure out the right way to frame some of my questions. So that's where I'm using you as a little bit of a test case. But
Greg, I have a question. So I think it's probably the case, but let me confirm. You have some experience at this point using coding agents on legacy code. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are times you can think of, and it doesn't have to be with OpenHands, just sort of generally, what are examples of times when you're doing that you feel like this is fighting me. This is fighting what I'm trying to do, not helping because you're, obviously you've got a website about legacy code. Like you kind of know what you want to do, how you ought to be approaching some of these challenges. Did anything come to mind where it's fighting your understanding of that instead of helping you execute it?
I think there are a few ways how I use it. So for example, it's terrible when it comes to dealing with legacy code that you probably know. So there are a few ways how I approach it. Like, they're not completely unhelpful. They are helpful in some cases. For example, when I'm trying to understand the code base, what I try to do is I try to prompt the same LLM or I use multiple agents. So I prompt the same question across different agents, and then sort of like try to do a sample run on how the kind of changes that they make on the code base, right? And I try to write it down to see, okay, like these are all the touch points that the agent is working on, and I would discard it every single time, right? And based on that, I usually come up with my own hierarchical plan to work with it. And most of the transformation happens through IntelliJ. I only use the LLMs. I only use the IDE's refactoring primitives to make transformations, right? So that is one thing I do. The other thing that I try is to rename. I think rename helps a lot. But then I use it in combination with the what do you call it? The symbolic index in the IDE. So for example, I would say not all languages are like support rename really well, like Golang, Rust, like they're like not very supported in the IDE like as much as Java and Kotlin. So what I would do is I would go look at the symbolic table and then see how many places the function is being called or like the signature is being used. Then I would ask the LLM to go make the refactoring for me, right? So now I would go back to the Git GUI client and then see, okay, I saw 7 symbolic references here. Do I see 7 additions and subtract, like what do you call it? Like the unified def, you would have like similar count, right? So I use the Git GUI client to verify if that change has propagated throughout the code base, right? And then you do a compile cycle and then find out. So that is one thing. I think I use it sparsely. But then one of the recent problems that I'm running into is how do you get existing code base under test, right? So that is something that is very tricky because it's a combinatorial problem and LLMs are not really great at covering the right program execution paths. But I believe that is an algorithmic problem for a tool where you find out the execution paths of the program and then use that information to feed it to the LLM saying, hey, these are all the places where you need to sort of like write the tests, right? So I would say like there are like 5 paths inside this block, but I can build on top of the previous example because the LLM has like exact information and I'm like not using, I'm like not relying on randomness to get my code under test, right? You could still take it a little bit further because like I believe like LLMs do a lot of stuff, but I think tools can actually abstract a lot of these things from LLMs and say, hey, write like, write tests for this function, but then tools themselves can nudge the LLM to say, this is the next test that you want to write, and these are the 4 previous tests, and this is the branch that we want to hit, right? Which means the chances of me getting a more comprehensive coverage and more predictable coverage is a lot more easier, right? And you could also sort of, if you bring in the code coverage information into this flow, then you can actually discard tests that do not improve code coverage, right? And it can do it predictably, and then you can also throttle the amount of tests the LLM generates. So I think like tooling is one area where it's incredibly underserved at this point, because like a lot of folks are caught up with LLMs. But for us to maximize the benefits that we get out of LLMs, I think significant amount of effort should also go into tooling, especially when you're working with legacy code bases, because that's a completely different mental model and a risk profile compared to building something from the scratch, right? So I think like that gap is something that I'm also trying to cater to. But eventually, when the coding agent like covers enough base when it comes to software development, then I think people will probably look into those spaces or underserved markets that I'm talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
So legacy code, I think it's still a lot of people still consider like rewrites as refactoring, and I'm okay with it, because it's still, say for example, some places where I would say is I write a front-end UI that is completely meshes up like the side effects and the state management. But then once you get an idea, you build a prototype, and then you create a state machine. And if you ask the LLM to plug in the state machine into the existing UI, it does a pretty good job most of the time. So that's something that I really like. Like that's still rewrite if you don't have safety nets or like reliable way to verify observable behavior. But I think like a lot of folks are conflating refactoring with rewrites, and then they say, okay, LLMs can solve rewrites, but I don't believe so, unless I see AST transformations, or you have a safety net with tests, and then like that LLM does whatever it wants to do. So that I do, like say for example, I generate large functions with large language models, but I have enough test coverage. But now at this point, I'm like, I don't care about AST transformation. Just like go rewrite whatever you want to do, break it down into smaller functions, but just make sure that tests are passing. So that part I am comfortable with the coding agents doing. But the other aspects of legacy code refactoring, or like working with like existing code, I probably would like more control over the code base, and I use coding agents heavily for exploration than for transformation.
I noticed we had a few people come on.
Yeah, welcome to the new folks. Thanks for joining.
Yes. Hello, Ken and Alex. I went ahead and dropped in the chat, but I'll go ahead and say it out loud as well. We're definitely open to learning about your experience with OpenHands. I think the easiest way to get started is just to share where you use OpenHands the most and your experience on how that is. So if you're using the cloud-based, the browser, if you're using the CLI, like what's the good, and like what are some things that like you wish if you had a magic wand could have. But you're also welcome to drop it in the chat if you are unable to unmute as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess maybe about 12 months of experience with OpenHands. We crossed paths kind of early on when I run software businesses, kind of for the career. And my previous business was an InsurTech, processing spreadsheets for commercial property insurance placement, and using coding agents to essentially write a custom transformation for each spreadsheet because of peculiarities of how that is structured. So that's where I first started using it, and we were using it essentially in our Kubernetes environment to spin it up. I have recently started a new venture, which is little bit more horizontal approach to the same problem, taking essentially coding agents for spreadsheets approach to other use cases. There are many business processes where this kind of boring problem exists, where the spreadsheet arrives and cannot be shoved into the context window for obvious reasons. But if you can write a custom Python script for it, given the special things that need to happen to in the business process, that helps a lot of folks. So that's what I'm working on right now, and so far it's been quite helpful to have OpenHands harness. But I'm happy to say more or answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex, for joining. One thing I've actually been trying to do some research on is around like our Docker dependency with OpenHands. I'd be curious if that's kind of a roadblock in your mind to getting started, or if that's an advantage. Like, I'd be curious just sort of like how you think about the Docker dependency in terms of getting up and running with OpenHands.
You mean, Joe, was it difficult in my case?
I think, yeah, in terms of your experience, and then I have a more general kind of question after that.
I mean, certainly it requires some expertise. I think it has benefits, obviously, for isolation and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
The one problem that I kind of ran into is just infrastructure requirements for high volume processing, where there is, maybe 200, 300 jobs running in parallel.
Right.
It starts to consume compute when you run an image. Images, I don't think, are quite optimized or as optimized as they should be. So they end up eating up a lot of resources. So, I think any work that would go to that would be helpful.
Yeah, makes sense. And then I think maybe in terms of like a general question is like, if you're just from your experience kind of, in maybe from a development side, like if you were to go out and wanted to try a new AI coding tool, what would be kind of a great kind of install experience for you? What would be kind of like your preferred way to kind of use that AI coding tool?
Well, I mean, I think, we in my case, it's most of the value is created in the harness around OpenHands and tailoring that harness to this specific problem. So there is a lot of custom tools that are given to the agent. There is a custom prompt that is running, and the models are not the general purpose coding models, but more so models from Grok and Cerebras that are much cheaper but much faster, because the problem is kind of a finite problem. So I don't know if there is like a whole lot out there that allows for that level of customization at the moment. So I actually quite like kind of the SDK direction that you guys are taking, because it just seems like you're going more in that direction. And I spent 20 years in automation in enterprise. That's basically all I've ever done. Back to previous generations, and there is just endless supply of these boring schlep type problems that a new tranche of them gets unlocked with the new way of applying technology to it and applying coding agents at scale. Obviously they have some better guardrails, better repeatability, better audit, and there is many benefits to them. So it just unlocks kind of the next batch of business problems to solve, and so
yeah.
That's what I'm working on.
Yeah. Actually, that's interesting around, you brought up the SDK. One of the things that we're trying to figure out is like when customers end up implementing the SDK, they tend to implement it to solve a kind of a single repetitive task, right? And use the agent to, tackle that task and be able to solve it, with AI instead. How, I know that it sounds like you might have experience with, building sort of AI agents, if you will, on your own. How did you go from like that trial and error stage to an agent that is then repetitive and reusable on a given task? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the business, I think what's easier to do is you're automating, and automation by definition is doing the task that today is already done and is mostly done by manually. So there is a lot of reference data, and so evals are, not that difficult to come by relative to, like, for example, what the person was just talking about, refactoring code. Like, there is no eval for refactoring code, and some of the AST things. These are good thoughts, but it's a much different problem from, like, okay, here's a spreadsheet and it needs to be this spreadsheet, and if it's not, then it didn't work. So there's a fair amount of effort that we put into evals, and just writing evals for tasks that are not text, right? Like comparing two spreadsheets is not as trivial as comparing two text files.
Gotcha. So I'm assuming kind of the workflow started out with like writing prompts and then evals against those prompts until you felt like you've got enough kind of consistency, I guess, and then moving it forward in terms of like production, putting that agent into like a production type scenario.
Yeah, and just making it fast and cheap, and
cool. Yeah.
Plugging in tools without sacrificing the quality.
Cool. Awesome. One thing, just for kind of all the folks who are familiar with OpenHands on the call, we are also looking to kind of understand, the SDK is sort of is one of our latest, major features that we've released. We're also trying to understand some of the things that you wish the product had, whether it's at the SDK or in our GUI or CLI, but just don't see today. And we're generally trying to understand kind of where do you see some of the bigger gaps, whether it's like a gap with another tool that you've used or just something that you feel like, oh, this would be great for OpenHands to add to the project. So open-ended question, but if any folks have feedback on like, I really wish you could solve XYZ, even if it's a bug that's been bothering you for a while. That's some of the things that we're looking to kind of capture from today's call.
I mean, I have one. If
yep.
that just comparing different models is quite difficult. I mean, obviously there's been a lot out there in terms of kind of fidelity of implementation of models by various providers. Tool calling accuracy and all this stuff, particularly for models like QAM and KMA and all that other stuff. So it's a real issue. But when I raised these issues in OpenHands, there was a lot of help for the SDK to address some of these issues of how the tools are called for the open source models, particularly when custom providers are used that specialize, when you're trying to get to 2,000-3,000 tokens per second. I don't know if you guys have initial feedback whether that actually whether the new AI SDK really provide any meaningful improvement. I haven't had a chance to check yet.
In terms of being able to kind of compare models and the performance of those models.
Sometimes it just doesn't work, right? It just says parameters are missing for required tools, or it just doesn't call tools, or the tool calling ratio is just makes it completely useless.
Gotcha.
Out of 10 models that are out there, I would say, my experience, 30% work with OpenHands.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious around, I don't know who's best on our side to kind of help answer that, but in terms of, do we have any kind of like metrics around the tool calling success across different models that OpenHands operates on, and what we can say about that for the SDK at this point?
Yeah, I don't think we have anybody on the research team on the call, but we're going to start publishing benchmarks that show, at least for like the top, call it 10 models that are out there, including like a mixture of big foundation models, open source models, like a good cross section of the models that are out there. We're going to show, how well we perform on SWEBench, as well as like a handful of other benchmarks through our VersaBench benchmark. So hopefully we'll be able to give folks some more guidance on like which models work best for which things.
Yeah, Robert, are you including Grok with the Q and Cerebras in that?
I don't know that we'll be using so Cerebras, if I remember right, their whole shtick is speed.
Yeah, basically it's like Quen at 3,000 tokens per second.
Yeah,
which is quite helpful for a lot of cases.
yeah. I don't know exactly which models we'll use and we'll evaluate against, but I'll note those down as requests.
Because it's quite interesting because Quen on Grok is completely useless, but it works very well on Cerebras. And Kimi doesn't work on Cerebras, but works very well on Grok because of these two issues. So anything that can be done about that would be good.
Good to know. Yeah, it's kind of wild how much.
And you saw that the Open Router released these Exacto endpoints that just have guaranteed tool calling accuracy. So I think a lot of people are putting a lot of effort into it because obviously one of the benefits of having an SDK is you can give more tools to the agent. But if what's the point of having even 10 tools if it's like 50% accuracy? It's pointless.
Okay.
And is that the Open Router project Exacto? I'm just doing some Googling on that right now.
Yeah, they basically last week I think released basically blast certain endpoints as having much higher accuracy of tool calls than others. And so they have benchmark for that. Kimi, Moonshot or whatever is the company behind that, also released the vendor benchmark that compares about 20 providers for tool calling accuracy for Kimi models. And at the bottom is like 50%, at the top is like 90%. So it's a huge difference. And it's just the difference between it being useless and it being production ready.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I'm going to look into this. I think there's probably more we can publish around, to your point, even like the tool calling reliability.
Yeah, I'm just going to drop a link in chat for Open Router stuff. That's their provider variance, and then this other link is a reference point that Kimi Moonshot is doing, comparing all the providers. You can see the difference is huge.
Yeah, definitely. Opening that out. Right. Yep. Cool. That's useful. And I think we had a question from Ken about publishing trajectories for our benchmarks. Is that? Let me see.
Yeah, I think Jamie's going to pass that to the agent team. I don't know offhand if we've got recent trajectories up.
I think our at a high level, what our plan is we're obviously doing the currently like the testing of the SDK against our benchmarks, but then we do eventually plan to go back and publish that publicly for SWEBench and then VersaBench too. So we're very much in the evaluation mode right now with the SDK.
Yeah, Joe, I think the question of publishing the score is different than the question of publishing the trajectory.
Totally agree. And just kind of sharing a little bit of where we are right now. Yeah. But yeah, we should pass that along to the research folks.
Already passed.
Excellent.
Well, I'll go ahead and say I really appreciate all of you taking time to meet with us. Any of this feedback all of the feedback that you've given us is like really valuable. And we always take it under consideration. The community is very important to us. So yeah, just wanted to bring that up. And then feel free. Obviously, we don't have this call every week. We may start bringing this call to a regular cadence, but if you ever have any other feedback, do not hesitate to drop it in our feedback channel. If you feel like it's getting, we do our best to monitor, but if you feel like it's getting buried in any way, feel free to @, me, Jamie, and I am happy to make sure that it gets in front of the right eyes and gets addressed.
Awesome.
Cool. Are there any other questions that you all have for us, or are there any questions from the OpenHands team for the guests? Any events in New York City? Yes, we have multiple events coming up in New York City. So the event that is coming upon us the quickest is going to be our Coding with AI, which I am bringing up, and I am changing the discovery so that it is public, as we want to make sure that people who want to attend can discover it and attend. So updating the visibility now. And I will go ahead and drop that link in the chat. Feel free to come say hello. And if you need to get put off the wait list, also don't hesitate to ping me about that as well. But yes, this is our next event in New York City on Wednesday, November 19th at 6 p.m. Robert will be there. Rohit will be there. Clark will also be there from our go-to-market. High likelihood Ray will also be stopping by, and myself will be there. And then we are currently working on getting a little panel together to kind of talk about the current trends and best practices using AI in software development.
And immediately before that New York event, Robert and I are both speaking at AI Native DevCon. So you can come say hi to us on, I believe, the 17th.
Yes. And I can also get a link for that. It's going to be the 18th and 19th. And here is the link for that, as well as we do have a coupon code. You can either use OpenHands 25 and get 25% off, or I think it was like Ray 25, right? And then you can also get 25% off.
Ray M25. It's right above in the chat.
Okay, perfect. So ignore my message. Nice. Yes, so those are our New York events. And then if you're really curious and want to look ahead, we will be at QCon AI in New York City, which is December 16th and 17th. And we will likely have a side event around there as well. That is still in planning stages, but the best way to keep up on that is to, one, review our community call, as I will be going over all the upcoming events virtually and in person, and also to subscribe to our newsletter. Our newsletter at the bottom always goes over our upcoming events as well as our previous events if they are recorded and can be shared. And since I have all of you still here, I would like to get your permission, if it's okay, to share this recorded call with the greater OpenHands community. So please let me know if that is okay. And then also, if you are okay publishing this to be publicly discovered on YouTube, you may not be okay with that. So just let me know. And if we have consensus that it is okay, then I will publish it either on YouTube to be discovered, or if you just are okay with the community part, let me know. Otherwise, if we don't have consensus on that, I will just make some notes that are more anonymous that we can share with the greater community. Cool. And then welcome also to Hamza, who also just joined. Feel free to drop any questions or your experience with OpenHands in the chat. And we have about 9 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and reopen the floor. If anyone has questions for us, or if we have questions for anyone who is here, now would be the time to ask. Cool. I think we've come to like a good stopping point for right now. We're going to have our community call in 8 minutes, same meeting link, and we will, I plan to just put myself on mute and turn off the camera and I'll be here. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I'm going to kick off the recording for the community call in 8 minutes. Feel free to stick around. Feel free to leave. Feel free to catch it async when I publish the call. Just let me know. Really appreciate all of your time and excited to see you in the Slack.